Your mind isn't broken. It's just operating on outdated software. Every day you wake up running the same mental programs, the same thought patterns, the same emotional responses that were installed years ago. And most people accept this as permanent. They think their anxiety is just who they are. Their self-doubt is their personality. Their scattered focus is their nature. But what if I told you that's all programming? And what if I told you there's a way to rewrite that code in complete silence? Here's what nobody talks about. Your brain doesn't distinguish between what's real and what's vividly imagined. It responds to mental rehearsal the same way it responds to actual experience, which means every thought you repeat, every image you visualize, every internal dialogue you run is literally rewiring your neural pathways. The question isn't whether you're changing your brain. You are, every second. The question is whether you're doing it deliberately or letting it happen by accident. Most people are running on mental autopilot, letting their environment dictate their internal state. They wake up, check their phone, absorb negativity, react to stress, and wonder why they feel stuck. But there's a small percentage of people who figured out something different. They've learned to operate from the inside out, to rewire their psychology without saying a word, without needing anyone else, without expensive therapy or complicated systems. Just 7 silent steps that can transform how your mind works. And here's the thing about silence. It's not empty. It's where real power lives. Because when you stop filling every moment with noise, distraction, and external validation, you create space for something deeper. You create space for rewiring. Most people are terrified of silence because they don't want to face what's actually happening in their heads. But the ones who master it, they become untouchable. They develop a kind of mental immunity that makes them impossible to shake. I'm about to show you exactly how this works. Not theory, not philosophy, but a precise system that targets the deepest layers of your psychology. 7 steps that will change how you think, how you feel, and how you show up in the world. And the beautiful part? You can do this anywhere, anytime, without anyone knowing. This is invisible transformation, mental reconstruction that happens in the shadows of your own mind. But first, let me tell you why most people fail at changing themselves. They try to modify behavior without addressing the source code. They try to stop procrastinating without rewiring their relationship with discomfort. They try to build confidence without dismantling their internal critic. They're treating symptoms instead of causes. It's like trying to change what's displayed on a computer screen without touching the programming that creates it. Your mind operates on 3 levels: surface thoughts, emotional patterns, and core beliefs. Most self-help targets surface thoughts. Think positive. Practice gratitude. Visualize success. And sure, that might create temporary shifts. But unless you reach the deeper levels, the old programming eventually takes over again. That's why people read self-help books, feel motivated for a week, then slip back into their old patterns. They never actually rewired anything fundamental. What I'm about to show you goes deeper. These 7 steps target the architecture of your mind, the fundamental structures that create your reality. And they do it through a specific type of mental training that most people have never encountered. Not meditation in the way you think of it, not visualization in the way it's usually taught. Something more precise, more surgical, more permanent. Here's what's going to happen. Each step builds on the previous one, creating a cascade of neurological changes that compound over time. The first step alone will shift how you relate to your thoughts. By step 3, you'll notice your emotional reactions changing. By step 5, people around you will start responding to you differently without knowing why. And by step 7, you'll have access to a level of mental control that most people can only dream of. But I need to warn you about something. This isn't comfortable. Real rewiring? Never is. You're going to encounter resistance. Your mind is going to fight this process Because it threatens the status quo, the old patterns, the familiar suffering, the predictable limitations. Part of your psychology is invested in keeping you exactly where you are. So when you start changing the fundamental code, expect pushback, expect discomfort, expect your mind to whisper that this isn't working, that you should go back to the old ways. That resistance isn't a sign you're doing it wrong. It's proof you're doing it right. Because the deeper you go into rewiring your mind, the more you threaten the old programming, and that old programming doesn't go down without a fight. But here's the secret. The resistance only lasts as long as you're in transition. Once the new patterns lock in, once the new neural pathways become dominant, the resistance disappears. What once felt foreign becomes natural. What once required effort becomes automatic. The 7 steps I'm about to reveal aren't random techniques. They're a sequence. Each one prepares your mind for the next. Each one creates the neurological foundation for deeper change. Skip a step and you'll hit a ceiling. Rush the process and you'll create instability. But follow the sequence exactly as designed, and you'll experience something most people never do. Complete psychological transformation from the inside out. Step 1 is called Neural Detox, and it begins with a simple recognition. Your mind is currently contaminated, not with bad thoughts or negative emotions, but with mental noise, constant internal chatter that keeps you trapped in reactive patterns. Most people try to manage this noise, organize it, make sense of it. But that's like trying to clean polluted water by stirring it faster. The first step isn't to think better thoughts. It's to create space between you and your thoughts entirely. Here's how this works. Right now, as you're listening to this, you have thoughts appearing and disappearing in your awareness. Most people are completely identified with these thoughts. They think they are their thoughts. But what if I told you that you're actually the space in which thoughts appear? What if the real you is the awareness that observes thoughts, not the thoughts themselves? This isn't philosophical speculation. It's the foundation of psychological freedom. The Neural Detox step teaches you to recognize this space, to find the gap between thoughts, to rest in the awareness that exists before thinking begins. And when you learn to access this space consistently, something profound happens. You stop being controlled by your mental content. You stop reacting to every thought, every worry, every fear that passes through your mind. You become the observer instead of the participant. Most people spend their entire lives trapped in the content of their thoughts, believing every story their mind tells them, following every emotional impulse, reacting to every mental trigger. But when you learn to rest in awareness itself, you gain access to a level of choice that didn't exist before. You can watch thoughts arise without being swept away by them. You can feel emotions without being controlled by them. You can face challenges without losing your center. This first step alone will change everything. Because once you realize you're not your thoughts, you're free to choose which thoughts deserve your attention and which ones you can simply let pass. You're free to interrupt automatic patterns before they take over. You're free to respond instead of react. And that freedom is the foundation for everything that comes next. But Neural Detox is just the beginning. Because once you create space from your thoughts, you need to learn what to do with that space, how to use it, how to direct it, how to make it serve your transformation instead of just providing temporary relief. That's where step 2 comes in. And step 2 is where most people get confused because it requires you to do something that feels completely counterintuitive. Step 2 is called Pattern Interruption. And here's where it gets dangerous, because most people, when they discover that space between thoughts, they try to keep it peaceful. They try to maintain calm. They try to avoid anything that might disturb their newfound awareness. But that's exactly backwards. That's like learning to swim in a bathtub and thinking you're ready for the ocean. Real rewiring happens under pressure. It happens when your old patterns activate and you consciously choose a different response. It happens when anxiety tries to hijack your nervous system and you redirect that energy instead of suppressing it. It happens when anger flares and you channel that force toward transformation instead of destruction. The space you created in step 1 isn't meant to be a hiding place. It's meant to be a launching pad. Here's what pattern interruption looks like in practice. The next time you feel triggered, the next time your mind starts spinning into familiar territory, the next time you catch yourself falling into an automatic response, you stop. Not by forcing the pattern to end, but by inserting conscious choice into the process. You feel the trigger activate. You recognize the pattern beginning to unfold. And instead of following it to its predictable conclusion, you pause in that space of awareness and ask one simple question. What would strength do here? Not what feels good. Not what's comfortable. Not what you've always done. What would strength do? And then you do that, even if it feels foreign, even if it feels wrong, even if every fiber of your being is screaming to follow the old pattern. You choose strength over familiarity. You choose growth over comfort. You choose the unknown over the predictable. This is where most people fail. They want transformation without discomfort. They want new results while clinging to old patterns. They want to rewire their mind while avoiding anything that activates their current programming. But that's not how neurology works. You can't change a pattern without first interrupting it. And you can't interrupt it without being willing to feel the full force of what wants to continue. The beautiful thing about pattern interruption is that it compounds. Every time you choose differently, you weaken the old pathway and strengthen the new one. Every time you respond with awareness instead of automaticity, you're literally rewiring your brain. The neurons that fire together wire together. And when you consistently choose conscious responses over unconscious reactions, those conscious responses become your new default. But here's what nobody tells you. The first few times you interrupt a pattern, it feels like you're fighting yourself. Because you are. Part of your nervous system wants to complete the familiar sequence. It's been trained to follow certain triggers with certain responses. And when you interrupt that process, it creates internal tension. Your body might shake. Your mind might race. You might feel like you're doing something wrong. That tension is the feeling of transformation. It's the sensation of old neural pathways being dismantled and new ones being constructed. Most people interpret this tension as a sign to stop, to go back to what feels normal. But that's exactly when you need to lean in harder. Because on the other side of that tension is a version of yourself that doesn't exist yet. A version that responds to life from strength instead of reactivity. A version that can't be shaken because their responses are chosen, not automatic. Step 3 is called Identity Reconstruction. And this is where the work becomes surgical. Because beneath your thoughts, beneath your emotional patterns, beneath your behavioral responses, there's something even deeper. There's the story you tell yourself about who you are, your identity, the collection of beliefs and assumptions that define your sense of self. And here's the problem. Most people's identity was constructed by accident. It was built from childhood experiences, social conditioning, random feedback from others, failures and successes that happened before you had any framework for interpreting them. Your identity wasn't designed by you. It was assembled from fragments of experience and opinion that may have nothing to do with who you actually are or who you're capable of becoming. And as long as you're operating from an accidental identity, you'll get accidental results. Identity reconstruction is about taking conscious control of this process. It's about recognizing that identity isn't fixed. It's fluid. It's constructed, and it can be reconstructed. But not through affirmations or positive thinking or trying to convince yourself you're someone you're not. Through evidence. Through creating experiences that prove to yourself that your old identity was just one possibility among many. Here's how this works. Your current identity has boundaries. Things you believe you can and cannot do. Situations you can and cannot handle. Qualities you do and do not possess. These boundaries feel absolute because they've been reinforced by experience. But what if those experiences were just the result of operating from a limited identity? What if changing your identity could change your experiences? The key is to identify one belief about yourself that's been limiting you. Not a preference or a habit, but a core belief about your nature. Maybe you believe you're not good with people. Maybe you believe you're not creative. Maybe you believe you're not capable of sustained focus. Whatever it is, you're going to systematically prove that belief wrong. Not through argument or logic, but through deliberate action that contradicts your identity. If you believe you're not good with people, you start having conversations that prove otherwise. If you believe you're not creative, you start creating things that demonstrate your creativity. If you believe you can't focus, you start practicing sustained attention in ways that build evidence of your capacity. The goal isn't to become perfect at these things overnight. The goal is to create cracks in the old identity that allow a new one to emerge. Each time you act in contradiction to your limiting beliefs, you create cognitive dissonance. Your mind has to reconcile the fact that you just did something that your identity said was impossible. And when this happens repeatedly, consistently, with conscious intention, your identity starts to shift. Not all at once, but gradually. The old story begins to lose its grip. The new story starts to feel more true than the old one. But identity reconstruction requires something most people aren't willing to give. It requires you to let go of being right about your limitations. It requires you to release the comfortable prison of your current self-concept. It requires you to admit that maybe, just maybe, you've been underestimating yourself for years. And that admission can be terrifying because it means you're responsible for everything that's possible from this point forward. The fourth step is called emotional sovereignty. And this is where most people discover they've been living as slaves to their own feelings. They wake up and their mood determines their day. Someone says something sharp and their energy collapses. They see bad news and their nervous system hijacks their entire afternoon. They've handed over control of their internal state to every external circumstance, every random comment, every unpredictable event that crosses their path. But here's what nobody teaches you. Emotions aren't things that happen to you. They're energy patterns that flow through you. And like any energy, they can be directed, channeled, transformed. The person who masters this step doesn't suppress emotions or pretend they don't exist. They learn to work with emotional energy like a conductor works with an orchestra. Every feeling becomes a tool. Every sensation becomes information. Every emotional wave becomes fuel for transformation. The technique is deceptively simple. When an emotion arises, instead of being swept away by it or pushing it down, you breathe into it. Not regular breathing, but conscious breathing that treats the emotion like energy that needs circulation. You inhale and imagine drawing that emotional energy up through your body. You hold the breath and let that energy concentrate in your chest, your heart center. Then you exhale and direct that energy toward whatever you're building in your life. Anxiety becomes fuel for focus. Anger becomes fuel for boundary setting. Sadness becomes fuel for compassion. Fear becomes fuel for courage. You're not changing the emotions. You're changing what you do with them. You're transforming reactive energy into creative energy. And when you master this process, something extraordinary happens. You stop being afraid of your own feelings because you know you can work with whatever arises. Step 5 is called attention architecture. And this step separates the amateurs from the masters because everything we've covered so far creates the foundation, but this step builds the structure. Your attention is the most valuable resource you possess. More valuable than time, more valuable than money, more valuable than any skill or connection. Because attention is what shapes reality. Where you place your attention consistently, That becomes your experience of life. But most people's attention is scattered, reactive, constantly pulled in directions they never chose. They're addicted to stimulation, to novelty, to the next notification, the next distraction, the next hit of external validation. Their attention has been hijacked by forces that don't serve their growth. And as long as their attention remains unfocused, their transformation remains superficial. Attention architecture is about taking back control. It's about training your mind to focus where you decide it should focus, for as long as you decide it should focus there, regardless of what's happening around you. This isn't meditation in the traditional sense. This is attention training, mental conditioning that builds your capacity to direct your awareness with surgical precision. You start with 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes where you place your attention on one single point and keep it there. Not your breath, not a mantra, but something that requires active engagement. The sensation of your feet on the ground, the feeling of air moving across your skin, the sound of silence between sounds, something subtle that demands your full presence to perceive. When your mind wanders, you notice it wandering and bring it back. Not with force, not with judgment, but with the same gentle persistence you'd use to train a puppy. The goal isn't to stop thoughts from arising. The goal is to strengthen your capacity to choose where your attention goes, regardless of what thoughts arise. And as this capacity grows, everything changes. Step 6 is called reality coding. And this is where the invisible becomes visible. Because once you've mastered the first 5 steps, you gain access to something most people don't even know exists. The ability to consciously program your subconscious mind, to install new beliefs, new patterns, new automatic responses that serve your highest vision instead of your oldest wounds. Your subconscious doesn't think. It doesn't analyze. It doesn't judge. It simply executes whatever programming it's been given. And for most people, that programming was installed randomly, accidentally, without any conscious oversight. But when you understand how the subconscious works, you can begin to reprogram it deliberately. The key is to communicate with your subconscious in its own language, not words, but images, not logic, but feeling, not concepts, but direct experience. You create vivid mental rehearsals of who you're becoming, not fantasy, but detailed, sensory-rich experiences of your transformed self in action. You feel what it feels like to move through the world with unshakable confidence. You see what it looks like to respond to challenges with calm strength. You experience what it's like to operate from your highest potential instead of your familiar limitations. And you do this consistently, persistently, until these mental rehearsals become more real to your nervous system than your current circumstances. Until your subconscious begins to align your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors with this new programming. Until who you're becoming starts to feel more natural than who you've been. The 7th and final step is called integration protocol. And this is where everything you've built gets locked into place. Because transformation without integration is just a temporary high. Real change happens when your new patterns become so deeply embedded that you couldn't go back to the old ones even if you tried. Integration means taking everything you've learned in silence and expressing it through action. It means bringing your inner transformation into the world and letting it reshape how you move through life. It means no longer hiding your growth behind closed doors, but allowing your evolution to become visible in every interaction, every decision, every moment of your existence. This isn't about announcing your transformation to the world. It's about embodying it so completely that others feel the shift without you saying a word. It's about carrying yourself differently, speaking differently, choosing differently, responding differently. It's about becoming living proof that minds can be rewired, that people can change, that transformation is possible for anyone willing to do the work in silence. And here's what happens when you complete all 7 steps. You don't just change your mind. You change your entire relationship with reality. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become a creator of experiences. You stop reacting to life and start responding from strength. You stop being controlled by external forces and start operating from internal power that nothing can shake. The person you become through this process isn't perfect. They still face challenges, still encounter obstacles, still experience the full range of human emotions. But they face everything from a different foundation. A foundation built through conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. A foundation that remains solid regardless of what storms may come. This is your blueprint for invisible transformation. 7 steps that require no equipment, no external validation, no permission from anyone else, just you, your commitment to growth, and your willingness to rewire the very architecture of your mind. The question isn't whether this works. The question is whether you're ready to do the work. Whether you're ready to become someone you've never been. Whether you're ready to discover what's possible when you take complete control of your inner world. Your mind has been running the same programs for years. Today, you learned how to rewrite the code. The only question left is whether you'll actually do it.